Hey there! Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to stay tuned for more exciting videos. Enjoy watching.
Catherine sat in her car in the office parking lot, checking messages on her phone. The clock read 8:45 in the evening, another long day at work. She sighed deeply as she typed a message for her husband. "I'm late, I'll be back in an hour." On the other hand, Travis, her husband, was sitting on the couch at home, watching the news on TV. He read her text and, without answering, put the phone aside. The usual scenario. For several months now, their communication has been reduced to formal messages and short phrases. Catherine turned her head when she suddenly heard a soft knock in her car. Andrew, her colleague, leaned against the window, holding a folder. "I forgot it in the conference room," he smiled, holding out the documents. "Oh, thanks," she replied, trying to hide her slight irritation. She knew that Andrew often finds excuses to linger near her. "Are you late again?" he asked. "Yes, work will not do itself." "Does your husband at least appreciate you for this?" Andrew suddenly blurted out. His tone was friendly, but with a hidden hint. Catherine shuddered. This question caught her by surprise. "What do you mean?" she answered, looking at him slightly surprised. "It's just, you deserve better." "If your husband really treated you the way you deserve, you wouldn't spend your evenings here." Catherine said nothing. She just turned on the engine and drove home without saying goodbye. Andrew remained standing in the parking lot looking after her. Travis saw his wife come in, drop her bag on a chair, and immediately go into the kitchen. She didn't even look in his direction. "How is work?" he said, not taking his eyes off the TV. "As always," Catherine answered shortly. She opened the fridge and took out a bottle of wine. Pouring herself a glass, she remembered Andrew's words, which sounded over and over in her head. "If your husband really treated you the way you deserve." Travis glanced at her but said nothing. The tension between them that they both felt hung in the air, like a thunderstorm before a storm. Catherine stood in the kitchen, leaning on the counter, slowly sipping wine. Andrew's words echoed loudly in her head. She hated the feeling of being blamed for her own life. At the same time, she couldn't completely ignore the fact that things had been difficult with Travis lately. Travis spoke from the sofa, his voice even but cold. "You always come home so late." This is starting to look weird. "Work, Travis." "Not everyone can sit at home and watch TV," she replied without looking at him. These words hit him. He turned off the TV and got up from the couch. "Is it my fault?" he asked coldly. "I didn't say that," said Catherine, turning away. She already regretted starting this conversation. Travis walked over to the kitchen island, leaning against it. "But you think so, don't you? That I don't appreciate you?" Catherine looked at him. She wanted to say that it was fine, that it was just her tiredness, but instead she said, "I don't know, Travis. Maybe we both no longer appreciate what we have." The silence that followed was interrupted by the ringing of her phone. Catherine quickly picked it up from the table and saw that it was Andrew. She placed the phone screen down and returned to her glass. "Who is it?" Travis asked, watching her movements. "Work," Catherine answered, trying to sound calm. He said nothing more, but his gaze darkened. Travis knew something was going on, but he still couldn't figure out what. The next day, Catherine again lingered in the office. She was working on the computer when Andrew walked into the office, holding 2 cups of coffee. He placed one in front of her and sat down next to her. "How are you today?" he asked. "Tired," answered Catherine shortly without looking up. "You can't do that, Kat. You are worth more than this, more than someone who doesn't even notice how hard you try." Catherine looked up at him. "Andrew, I am married." He smiled, but there was something dangerous in that smile. "Married to a man who doesn't understand how lucky you are to be you. If he tried even a little bit, you wouldn't have to hear this from me." She leaned back in her chair, feeling the tension build. It seemed to her that she was walking on a delicate crisis. "Andrew, I don't want to talk about it," she said firmly, turning back to the screen. "Okay," he answered, raising his hands up. "But if you ever decide you deserve better, I'm here." He got up and left, leaving her alone with her thoughts. That evening, Catherine returned home to find Travis on the couch again. She dropped her bag and sat down next to him, but it was cold between them. "I was thinking about us," he said suddenly, looking straight ahead. "And what did you decide?" she asked. Travis turned to her. I want to understand where we made a mistake. The next day, Catherine woke up early, but the house was quiet again. Travis was still asleep, and she was making herself some coffee, trying to collect her thoughts. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message from Andrew. How are you today? If you need company for lunch, let me know. Catherine stared thoughtfully at the screen. She wanted to just ignore the message, but her fingers typed, Thank you, but today is a lot of work. She put the phone down and finished her coffee quickly, trying to shake off the nagging guilt. It was a routine day at the office, but the tension between Catherine and Andrew was still in the air. At some point, he approached her and quietly asked, Is everything okay? Catherine looked up. She wanted to say that everything was fine, but instead said, I don't know, Andrew, I just don't know. He sat on the edge of her desk, leaning a little closer. Kat, you don't have to figure this out on your own. These words made her look away. She didn't want to hear it, but at the same time, a bit of doubt appeared in her heart. How is Andrew right? What? As her marriage has long been bursting at the seams? When Catherine returned home in the evening, Travis was already waiting for her in the kitchen. Dinner was on the table, her favorite seafood pasta. He rarely cooked, and it looked like a gesture of reconciliation. I decided we should have dinner together, he said, inviting her to sit down. Catherine sat down at the table, but her face remained tense. That's nice, she said quietly, looking down at her plate. Travis, sensing her reticence, put his fork down and looked at her. What's going on, Kat? I feel that you are far from just physically. She sighed, looking up at him. Haven't you felt this before? We have been living as neighbors for months. Travis shook his head. I tried to fix it, but you don't seem to give me a chance. You only noticed me when I started to disappear, answered Catherine with a hint of bitterness. Is there anyone else? Travis suddenly asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed fear and anger. The question struck her like a bolt from the blue. She didn't know what to say because, technically, nothing had happened yet. No, she answered after a long pause, looking him straight in the eyes. But do you really want to know how I feel? Yes, he answered. I feel invisible, and someone else started noticing it. The silence that followed these words was almost unbearable. Travis pushed back his chair and stood up. The one who notices is that your colleague? Catherine stopped. She hadn't expected him to guess so quickly. It doesn't mean anything, she said, but her voice was weak. It doesn't mean anything to you, Travis repeated with pressure. But this guy wants more. And he feels that he has a chance, because I, as you say, do not treat you enough. His words hit her hard because they were the truth. But was it entirely her fault? The next day at work, Andrew noticed that Catherine had become more reserved. She was avoiding him, staying away, but he wasn't going to back down. Kat, can we talk? He asked, catching up with her in the corridor. No, Andrew, we can't. And it would be better if you stopped it, she replied, trying to sound confident. But Andrew only smiled, leaning closer. You may deny it, but I know how you feel. You are worth more than that cold house and a man who doesn't know how to hold you. Catherine stood in her office, staring at the monitor, but her thoughts were far away. Travis and Andrew's words confused her completely. She felt cornered. Is she really destroying her marriage? Is it possible that her desire to feel loved is normal? There was a soft knock on the door. Without waiting for an answer, Andrew entered and closed them behind him. We need to talk, he said. Catherine turned to him, her face tense. Andrew, I asked you to stop. And I heard you, he answered, coming closer. But I can't stand by and watch you suffer. You see it yourself. He doesn't deserve you. Andrew, it's none of your business, Catherine replied firmly, feeling her patience run out. Andrew took another step forward. Now they were standing very close. You may deny it, but I know how you feel. I can see it in your eyes. Catherine wanted to say something sharp, but froze instead. Her heart was pounding, and her thoughts were confused. Her hand involuntarily touched the doorknob as if she wanted to escape, but her legs would not obey. Andrew leaned closer, and Catherine felt his warm breath. She wanted to stop him, but her body seemed to freeze. His lips touched hers, and for a moment she surrendered. But only for a moment. Catherine shoved him away, panting. No, Andrew, I'm not like that. He looked at her in surprise, but did not back down. Kat, it was real. We both felt it. It was a mistake, she said, clenching her fists. And it won't happen anymore. She opened the door sharply and left, leaving him standing in an empty office. That evening, Catherine returned home earlier than usual. Travis was in the kitchen making dinner. He looked at her in surprise. Did something happen? He asked. Catherine wanted to say that everything was fine, but instead she cried. Travis moved closer, but didn't touch her. Cat, talk to me, he said quietly. She looked up at him, her eyes full of tears. I made a mistake, Travis. I let someone get close to me. Travis recoiled as if her words were a blow. Someone from work? She nodded, wiping away her tears. But I stopped it. I realized that you are important to me and that I don't want to ruin it all. Travis was silent as he looked at her. Thoughts raced through his head. Why, Cat? Why did you let this happen? Because I felt lonely, she answered. But this is not an excuse. I want to fix everything if you want it too. Travis couldn't sleep. Catherine's words, her confession, and her tears, all these were raging in his head. He wasn't ready to just forget and forgive. He wanted to know who the man was and what exactly had happened. And most importantly, why he thought he could get into his marriage. That same evening, after Catherine fell asleep, Travis decided to act. He found her old correspondence, in which the name Andrew was mentioned, and realized that this was her colleague. After exploring a little more on social media, he found out what Andrew looks like. The next day, Travis appeared in front of the building around noon. He waited for Andrew to leave the office and go to the coffee shop across the street. Travis followed and sat down at the table directly across from Andrew. Andrew, right? He asked, his voice even but steely. Andrew raised his head and saw a strange man in front of him. But in a moment he guessed who it was. And you're Travis, Andrew said with a cheeky grin. Catherine's husband. We need to talk, Travis said, leaning in closer. Andrew leaned back in his chair holding his coffee. His self-assuredness irritated Travis. I'm listening to you, Andrew said calmly. You tried to destroy my marriage, Travis stated bluntly. Why? Andrew shrugged. Maybe because you didn't do your job. You made her feel alone, and I just showed her that she was worth more. It's none of your business, he replied. Our marriage is our problem, and you had no right to interfere. Andrew leaned forward, his face serious. You don't even understand how much you let her down. If you really loved her, I would never have stood a chance. A chance? Travis repeated. His voice was calm, but there was rage in his eyes. You think she was your prey? She came to me herself, Andrew answered, alluding to the moment when they almost kissed. These words were the last straw. Travis jumped to his feet, but immediately held himself back, clenching his fists. You won't go near her again, he said. If you try again, I'll make you regret it. Andrew smiled. Is this a threat? No, it's a promise, Travis said, looking Andrew straight in the eye. When Catherine got home that evening, Travis was already waiting for her. She noticed the tension in his face. Where were you today? She asked, taking off her coat. I was dating Andrew, Travis answered bluntly. Catherine froze. What did you do? What I had to do. I told him to leave you alone. Travis, this will only make things more difficult, she replied, her voice trembling. Maybe, he said, but I won't let anyone destroy what we have. Catherine understood that his words and actions were a way of protection. Catherine was silent for a long time after Travis's words. Her heart was pounding and her thoughts were confused. She was afraid that his meeting with Andrew would only fuel the situation, but deep down she felt grateful that Travis wasn't going to just back down. What exactly did you tell him? She asked quietly. Just enough for him to know that I know what's going on and I won't let him interfere in our relationship, Travis replied. And if he doesn't stop? She asked, looking at her husband. Then it will be his problem, Travis said firmly. Catherine sighed and moved closer to him. She sat down next to him and took his hand. I don't want it to destroy us, she whispered, but I am also guilty. I let this situation go too far. Travis looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there in a long time. Compassion. We're both to blame, Kat, he said. But if you want to fix everything, then I will also fight for us. The next day, Andrew appeared in the office again with the same smile on his face, as if nothing had happened. He could see how Catherine tried to avoid him, but it only fueled his ego. Good morning, Kat, he said as he passed her desk. Andrew, I don't want to talk to you, she answered sharply without even looking up. Oh, so you've already decided everything? He asked, leaning closer. Do you think your husband, who only now noticed your value, will be able to change the way you feel? Catherine rose sharply. Andrew, if you approach me again or try to say something, I will contact the management. It's finished. His smile disappeared and he took a step back. You're going to be sorry, Kat, he said quietly, then left. Travis made dinner that night, trying to bring some semblance of normalcy to their home. How was your day? Travis asked as he placed the food on her. I told Andrew that if he continued, I would go to management, Catherine replied. Travis paused for a moment, looking at her. And how did he react? He looked angry, but he left. I hope this is the end. Travis nodded, but his face remained tense. If this is not the end, you will tell me at once, he said firmly. I promise, she answered. The next day, Andrew sat in his car watching The Office. His pride was shattered, and he couldn't take it. He was not used to being rejected. He decided he wasn't going to let Catherine get rid of him so easily. He took out his phone and started typing messages. Kat, do you think this is over? I have your messages and all our conversations. How do you think your husband will react if he finds out more? Andrew pressed send and watched her reaction through the office window with a smile. Catherine got the message and turned white. Her hands shook as she read the words. She realized that Andrew was not going to stop, and now the threat was more real than ever. That same evening, Catherine told Travis about the message to Andrew. She showed him the text and shared her fears. He wants to blackmail me, she said, almost crying. Travis looked at the phone and then at her. His face was serious and cold. I won't let this man into our lives anymore, he said. We will put an end to this once and for all. In the morning, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, looking at Travis. His face was tense, but he didn't start a conversation. He was just waiting for her to say. I've decided, Catherine finally said. Travis lifted his head. What exactly? I will quit my job. He was shocked but didn't mind. Are you sure? This is a big step. Yeah, sure, she said with a sigh. If I stay, it will destroy us completely. Andrew will not stop, and even if he does, I will always be afraid that the situation will happen again. What about your career? Travis asked. I'll find another job, she answered. But now it is more important for me to restore what we lost. On the same day, Catherine came to the office with a prepared resignation letter. She walked past the workstations without looking at her colleagues and headed for the manager's office. She quickly forwarded the letter, explaining her decision succinctly and professionally. Leaving the office, she met Andrew in the corridor. He looked pleased with himself, but when he saw the seriousness on her face, he stopped. What does that mean? He asked, seeing the folder in her hands. I'm leaving, she said bluntly. Andrew was confused. Are you coming through me? Yes, she answered, looking him straight in the eyes. And this is the last time we talk. I'm sorry I let you get this far, but it's over now. Kat, think about it, he said, trying to hold her back. You deserve more than just going back to what you had with Travis. I deserve peace, she replied, her voice laced with determination. And I will get it, but without you. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing in a hallway full of colleagues staring at the scene in amazement. When Catherine got home, Travis was already waiting for her. She informed him that she was free, and for the first time in a long time she saw genuine relief in his eyes. That doesn't mean I ran away, she said. This means that I chose us. Travis nodded and hugged her, genuinely for the first time in a long time. We'll start over, he said. But this time I will do everything so that you don't feel lonely anymore. Catherine closed her eyes, feeling his words lift a weight from her heart. She knew this was just the beginning of a long road to rebuilding their relationship, but she was willing to walk the road. A few weeks later, Catherine found a new job at another company. She was working in a new environment, away from the past that had almost destroyed her life. Travis also started spending more time with her, making their relationship a priority. Andrew, having lost his game, was left alone. He did not expect that Catherine would choose marriage and do everything to save him. But for her, this choice was obvious. True love is not a game, but a struggle, and this struggle was worth it.